Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining. This is a seminar we are giving on heat illness prevention, and the target audience for this seminar is principally folks who are supervising workers in the field, construction contractors, as well as owners who are contracting construction management services. This seminar will go over different techniques and strategies. This is an OSHA compliant heat illness prevention training course. I'd like to introduce you to the presenter today, which is Donna Dormius. She's a project administrator with Solus Energy, and also Felipe Uzcategui, who is the director of project and construction management with Solus Energy. Just a little bit about Solus Energy. So we are a 100% woman-owned business. We have been in business for 15 years. We've worked on approximately 115 gigawatts of renewable energy projects. That includes primarily utility scale wind, solar, and energy storage. And it's been over 1,000 projects in North America that we've consulted on. We provide both consulting services and project and construction management services. With that, I will turn the presentation over to Donna to start.
Thank you. As Evelyn said, my name is Donna Dormius, and today we'll be going over several elements related to heat safety. Our goal for today is for everyone to be able to recognize heat-related illnesses, understand risk factors involved, and implement strategies for managing exposure to heat and sun, and to provide you with the knowledge to prevent heat-related illnesses and promote safety for yourself and your team. Why is understanding heat safety so important? High temperatures can lead to heat-related illnesses, which can be life-threatening if not managed properly. Awareness of the symptoms of heat-related illnesses and knowing how to respond can save lives. Prioritizing heat safety protects personal health and promotes community well-being during periods of extreme heat. Heat-related illnesses are those that are caused by exposure to abnormally high or prolonged amounts of heat and humidity without relief or adequate fluid intake. It is important to understand how the body thermoregulates or self-regulates its internal temperature. Very simply put, the human body has three internal mechanisms to aid in cooling itself. There's perspiration. Your sweat glands release sweat, which evaporates from the skin's surface, cooling the body. Vasodilation, the blood vessels under your skin widen or dilate, increasing blood flow to cooler areas. This helps release heat through radiation. And convection, heat transfers from the body to the surrounding air, aiding in cooling. Now that we know how the body responds to cool itself, it is important to understand the exact symptoms of the most common types of HRIs so that you are more capable of ensuring you and your colleagues' safety when working. As we discuss HRIs, we're going to start small and increase in severity as we go. First up, heat cramps. These usually affect workers who sweat a lot during strenuous activity. The sweating depletes the body's salt and moisture levels. Low salt levels can lead to painful cramps, and it is also a symptom of heat exhaustion. Some symptoms of heat cramps include muscle cramps, pain or spasms in the abdomen, arms, or legs. The recommended first aid is to drink some water and have a snack that can replace your carbohydrates and electrolytes, like a sport drink, every 15 or 20 minutes. It is also recommended that you avoid salt tablets, as you should be able to replenish your electrolytes from eating and drinking. And it's recommended that you get medical help if the person suffering heat cramps has heart problems, is on a low sodium diet, or if the cramps do not subside within the hour. Heat rash is a skin irritation caused by sweating during hot, humid weather. Heat rash typically looks like red clusters of pimples or small blisters. They usually appear on the neck, upper chest, groin, under the breast, or in the elbow creases, all the nooks and crannies of your body that can hold sweat. And the recommended first aid is to just try to keep the rash area dry and apply powders instead of creams or ointments to increase comfort. Heat syncope is a fainting episode or dizziness that usually occurs if you're standing for too long or suddenly stand up after lying or sitting for a long time. It's usually fainting or dizziness, and the recommended first aid is to sit or lie down in a cool place and drink water or clear juice or sports drink until you start to come to clarity. Rhabdomyolysis is a medical condition associated with heat stress and prolonged physical exertion. Rhabdo, for short, causes the rapid breakdown, rupture, and death of muscle. When muscle tissue dies, electrolytes and large proteins are released into the bloodstream. This can cause irregular heart rhythms, seizures, and damage to the kidneys. Some of the symptoms of rhabdo include muscle cramps and pain, abnormally dark tea or cola-colored urine, general weakness and intolerance to exercise, and the most terrifying, it can be asymptomatic. If you suspect a worker has rhabdo, the recommended first aid is to stop activity, drink more liquids, preferably water, and to seek medical help at the nearest medical facility. And while there, since rhabdo is not something that is generally checked for, you should ask to be checked for rhabdo, which would include a blood sample that is analyzed for creatine kinase. The following HRIs are the most dangerous and have a much higher likelihood of fatality. First is heat exhaustion. This is the body's response to an excessive loss of water and sweat, usually through excessive sweating. Some of the symptoms of heat exhaustion include headache, nausea, dizziness, weakness, irritability, thirst, heavy sweating, elevated body temperature, and decreased urine output. Some of the recommended first aid for heat exhaustion is to take the worker to an emergency clinic or emergency room for medical evaluation and treatment, to call 911 if medical care is unavailable, to have someone stay in close proximity with the worker until help arrives. You can also remove the worker from the hot area and give them cool liquids to drink, remove unnecessary clothing like socks and shoes, and to cool the worker with cold compresses or have them wash their head, face, and neck with cold water. Heat stroke is the most serious heat-related illness. It occurs when the body can no longer control its temperature. The body's temperature will then rise rapidly when the sweating mechanism fails and the body is unable to cool itself down. When heat stroke occurs, the body's temperature can raise to 106 degrees Fahrenheit within 10 to 15 minutes. For reference, you are advised to seek emergency medical care if your temperature goes over 104 degrees Fahrenheit at any point. Heat stroke can cause permanent disability or death if the person does not receive emergency treatment. Some of the symptoms of someone suffering from heat stroke include confusion, altered mental state or slurred speech, loss of consciousness, hot, dry skin or profuse sweating, very high body temperatures, and again, it is fatal if treatment is delayed. Recommended first aid includes immediately calling 911, staying with the worker until medical services arrive, moving the worker to a cool shaded area, and trying to cool the worker quickly using the following methods: giving them a cold water or ice bath if possible, soaking their clothing in cold water, circulating the air around them with a fan to speed cooling, and placing cold, wet cloths of water or ice on the head, neck, armpits, or groin of the person to cool them externally. Overexposure to heat often goes hand in hand with overexposure to UV rays that can damage skin cells. In the short term, this damage can cause a sunburn. We've all had them. A sunburn is a painful sign of skin damage from spending way too much time outdoors wearing way too little protective sunscreen. Years of overexposure to the sun can lead to permanent wrinkling, aging of the skin, age spots, and an increased risk for skin cancer. In addition to the skin, the eyes can also get sunburned. Sunburned eyes can become red, dry, and painful, and they'll feel gritty. Chronic overexposure of the eyes to sunlight can cause pterygium, which is tissue growth over the eyes that lead to blindness, cataracts, and perhaps macular degeneration, which is the leading cause of blindness. Sunburn symptoms include red, warm, swollen, tender skin, blistering, and in more severe cases, headache, fever, nausea, and fatigue. And the recommended first aid is any general painkiller, drinking more water, taking cool baths with wet clothes, avoiding more exposure, some kind of moisturizing cream or aloe, and you should seek medical attention if the burns cover more than 15% of your body, if you have experienced symptoms of dehydration, if your fever is over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you have extreme pain that lasts for more than 48 hours. Skin cancer is the most common cancer in the United States. Some people are at higher risk for skin cancer than others, but anyone can get it. The most preventable cause of skin cancer is overexposure to UV light, either from the sun or from artificial sources like tanning beds. The symptoms in skin cancer can include and are usually relegated to moles, either irregular borders on moles, moles that aren't symmetrical, the colors not being uniform, being bigger than a pencil eraser, or being itchy and painful, as well as sores that bleed and don't heal, and red patches or lumps. The recommended first aid for skincare is early detection. Doing regular self-examinations on your skin as you are exposed to UV rays, and then doing a yearly examination with your primary care physician or a licensed dermatologist just to get a yearly uplook on any moles that you may have gotten. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to read a few case studies that were created either by the CDC or OSHA that are based on true events with some mild edits for our purposes. Our first case study is on heat stroke. The scenario is as follows. A 44-year-old male worker, Guy, died of heat stroke while working on a North Carolina farm. He had been working in the fields for about a week. On August 1st, the heat index was between 100 degrees and 110 degrees Fahrenheit. The heat index reports how hot it feels to people outside based on the air temperature and humidity. Around 3 p.m., the worker complained to the crew leader that he was feeling ill. He drank some water and was driven to employee housing and left alone. He was found unconscious 45 minutes later. Emergency personnel took the worker to the hospital where he was pronounced dead. His core body temperature was 108 degrees. I haven't explained prevention strategies quite yet, but based on the first aid information I just gave you, what are 3 things that his crew, not Guy, what are 3 things that his crew did wrong in this scenario? When suffering from heat illnesses, one of the first things that the body loses is the ability to use your cognition, which is your ability to think clearly and understand that your body is signaling to your brain and vice versa. This is why I think these illnesses are so fatal, because people are often expected to look after themselves, and the ability to look after oneself is the first thing to deteriorate when undergoing a heat illness. They didn't take Guy's complaint all that seriously. When it comes to working in extreme temperatures for extended periods of time, any mild symptom, any mild discomfort can be a beginning sign of heat exhaustion, which can set in really quickly and lead to heat stroke. As you can see from the 45 minutes that it took from Guy stating that he didn't feel well to him being unconscious, dying of heat stroke. That they were not trained on the proper first aid techniques when someone is suffering from a heat illness. When the body's internal temperature gets that high when suffering from heat exhaustion or heat stroke, any water you put into the body will simply rise to match the body's temperature. You need to do proper cooling to the exterior of the body, which is what Guy's coworkers failed to do. Let us do some lessons learned real quick. Feeling ill when working in this heat is a very serious sign. You need to take it quickly. Proper first aid for someone suspected of heat exhaustion or heat stroke involves cooling the body as quickly as possible, not simply drinking water. And lastly, people who face heat illnesses don't always recognize that they face. If a worker shows signs of heat exhaustion or heat stroke, don't leave them alone until they receive medical attention. Now we're going to go over potential risk factors that can increase our susceptibility to heat-related illnesses. I've separated the risk factors that can possibly affect how someone suffers from HRIs into 3 different categories: personal, occupational, and environmental. There are 3 types of personal risk factors. There is physical, that's your age, your level of physical fitness, your pregnancy status, or your acclimatization status, which we will go into in more depth later. Next is behavioral. Alcohol, illicit drug use, low water intake, and excessive sun exposure. Alcohol and certain illicit recreational drugs like cocaine or MDMA can impact temperature regulation and hydration levels. Lower hydration levels and increased sun exposure without protection will definitely put you at increased risk for heat or sun injuries. Lastly is health. Obesity, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart disease, chronic medical conditions can all place someone at increased danger, as well as certain prescription medications to treat the following: diuretics, beta blockers, anticholinergics, antipsychotics, antibiotics. Please contact your health advisor to discuss your personal risk factors. During my research, I was most surprised by the number of prescribed medications that can place you at a higher risk. Diuretics cause you to shed fluid, which can make you sweat a lot. Beta blockers reduce the heart's ability to pump blood, impairing your body's natural ability to dissipate heat. Anticholinergics affect your ability to sweat, the body's natural way of cooling itself, and can cause your core body temperatures to rise. Some medications can also increase sensitivity to sunlight and your risk of getting a sunburn. Occupational risk factors include both the work environment and the work that you're doing. The temperature, humidity, length of time close to a heat source, and direct sunlight are all factors to pay attention to. In addition, the physical exertion or workload required for your job, being unaccustomed to working in the heat, and even the clothing or protective equipment you wear can contribute to your risk for heat illness. When workers engage in intense work, their bodies create heat. This metabolic heat combines with environmental heat from the sun, the temperature outside, so workers' core temperatures can increase to dangerous levels. PPE, like waterproof aprons, respirators, face shields, boots, gloves, they're often necessary to reduce hazards, but can also impede the body's normal way of getting rid of heat by sweating. Certain PPE can hold excess heat and moisture inside and increase the physical effort required to perform duties with their extra weight, making the worker's body even hotter, even faster. This reduction in sweat evaporation can also create humid, wet microenvironments that trap heat close to the skin, which can lead to HRIs like heat rash. Long days are defined by OSHA as an employee scheduled or reasonably expected to work over 12 hours in the workday or shift. These shifts can lead to extended exposure to heat without proper rest or supervision. Acclimatization is the process in which an organism adjusts to a change in its environment. For our context, it refers to the process of the body gradually adapting and tolerating higher levels of heat stress. Workers new to high heat environments, or even workers returning to high heat environments after a long break, need time for their bodies to adapt to working in hotter conditions. Acclimatized workers will sweat at a higher rate, which helps with evaporative cooling. Their sweat will contain less salt, preserving their electrolyte balance. They maintain lower body temperatures and heart rates, as well as an increased blood flow to the skin to benefit from the evaporative cooling of sweating. This also is where the personal risk factor of physical fitness can apply, as higher levels of physical fitness can make the acclimatization process faster and vice versa. It is recommended that for the first 1 to 2 weeks in a high heat environment, unacclimatized workers should be given extra precautions and lower workloads. I'll go over the specifics of the OSHA/CDC recommendations around this process when I get to prevention later. Environmental risk factors are exactly what they say on the tin, risk factors related to the weather and the environment. Air temperature is the simplest. It's the temperature of the ambient air measured with the thermometer. It's called dry bulb because the air temperature is indicated by the thermometer that's not affected by the moisture in the air. Humidity, or the amount of water vapor within a given space, is a temperature-dependent expression of the actual water pressure, which is water vapor pressure, which is the key climactic factor affecting heat exchange between the body and the environment itself. To put it simply, if the air is already saturated with water or is at a high humidity level, it will not be able to intake more moisture by evaporating the sweat off of your body. Wind is the rate in feet per minute at which air moves. Wind is important in heat exchange between the human body and the environment because of its role in convective, and evaporative heat transfer. Radiant heat sources include artificial, infrared radiation in the iron and steel industries, or natural, solar radiation, which can be direct, diffuse, or reflective, which simply describes the intensity of the sun's rays once they reach you. Sunlight exposure is highest during the summer between 10 and 4 p.m., increasing the risk of HRIs and sun damage when working outdoors during those hours. These daily environmental measurements can be taken from a variety of sources. The National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration's National Weather Service provides daily environmental measurements, which can be a useful supplement to the climactic factors measured at a work site. Now I can hear you asking me, I have a weather app on my phone, Donna. I'm good, right? And to that, I'll say no. Reports have shown that outdoor workers have died of heat stroke when the day's maximum heat index was only set for 86 degrees Fahrenheit. OSHA has found that less severe heat-related illnesses can happen at even lower heat index values. The flat temperature and the heat index are not enough to prevent unnecessary tragedies. Now, I have thrown a lot of different risk factors at you in the last few minutes. What do we do with factors? It is time for math. It's time for another case study. So for that, we're going to learn a new phrase. It's WBGT. That stands for Wet Bulb Global Temperature. OSHA since 1973 recommends using wet bulb global temperature instead of the regular temperature to monitor workplace environmental heat. It considers the 4 environmental factors I mentioned before and can be used for indoor as well as outdoor work environments. There are 2 ways of getting the WBGT. You can use this fun, funky little device. This is a WBGT device, and it contains 3 different thermometers. A dry bulb to measure ambient air temperature, a natural wet bulb to measure the potential for evaporative cooling, and a black bulb to measure radiant heat. You can place this device near the work site you're doing the analysis on. If you're working inside a warehouse or out in a sunny field for the day, that's where you'd place the device to get the reading. The second way, if you don't feel inclined to purchase the WBGT device, is by using OSHA's outdoor WBGT calculator provided for free on their website. In this calculator, you'll be able to input the date, time, time zone, various other relevant information on the weather for the day, and it will perform the calculations to give you the WBGT. Now, why did I explain all that? For this case study, we're going to be doing a post-incident investigation. The scenario goes as follows. In Tampa, Florida, on Friday, June 7th, 2024, at 4 p.m., a 30-year-old male landscaper named Emmett collapsed and died of heat stroke after a day of caring for residential lawns. Post-incident interviews indicate Emmett complained of feeling lightheaded and short of breath 2 hours before his death, but he refused assistance offered to him by his partner, Kyle. Kyle also noted that Emmett had mentioned being on Lipitor, which has a warning about exposure to extreme heat, and thinks it might have interfered with Emmett's body temperature regulation. Others said that Emmett had just moved to Tampa from the previous weekend and had started the job that Monday. Emmett was wearing 2 pairs of work pants on the day he died, but Kyle did not notice any profuse sweating or flushed or extremely dry skin. Interviews with EMS workers indicate that when he collapsed, EMS treated Emmett at the site and then transported him to the hospital. At the hospital, he was pronounced dead with an internal temperature of 107.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, I already did some of the research and found out what the weather was like on the location and date that Emmett died. To figure out if there was a heat hazard the landscaping company could have discovered before the fact that may have prevented Emmett's death. To find that, we're going to follow these steps. First, measure the environmental heat using the information in the scenario and the WBGT calculator. 2, you can estimate the workload using table 1. Then 3, we're going to add the clothing adjustment factors from table 2 to the WBGT you'll get from step 1. This process will yield an effective WBGT. 4, we're going to determine whether or not Emmett was acclimatized to the heat. And then 5, we're going to use table 3 to determine if there was whether the total heat stress was hazardous. When we put the information that I've given you, the date, the time, all the location, all the stuff right under the scenario into the calculator from the link, you will get an answer of about 79 degrees from the WBGT calculator, which does not sound too bad, but doesn't sound too bad. But if we analyze the clothing that Emmett was wearing, we can see that he was wearing a double layer of clothing, which would have us add 5.4 degrees Fahrenheit to that 79 degrees. And then we would get 84.4 degrees Fahrenheit as the effective WBGT. And using table 3 down here, we can see that an unacclimatized worker, which Emmett was because he had not been sufficiently adapted to the heat, reaches high risk levels of heat stress at about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. So Emmett was already at an incredibly high risk level for heat stress. Now, we can look from table 1 to figure out that Emmett and his crew were doing a heavy workload. So if we click to see table 4, this is a heat stress recommendation table based on NIOSH's 2016 guideline. As you can see, given the level of work Emmett was doing, heavy, and the effective WBGT, which I will remind you again was 84.4 degrees, Emmett was operating at a temperature that was well over the max safety limit of 73.4 degrees for an unacclimatized worker. Even if Emmett had been acclimatized with what he was wearing that day and his medication use, he would still be over the recommended safety threshold. This high risk level could have been determined if the heat hazard test was done and taken to mitigate the chance of Emmett passing away. Preventative control measures for heat safety. Engineering. An engineering control is a change to the design of the workplace with mechanization. These are pretty simple, so I'm just going to rattle them off. Installing an air conditioner in work areas, break rooms, and equipment cabs can significantly reduce heat exposure. Using general ventilation systems and cooling fans to improve air circulation. Using reflective shields to redirect radiant heat away from the employees. Installing exhaust hoods at points of high heat production to remove hot air and moisture. Insulating hot surfaces such as furnace walls to reduce heat radiation, providing cooled benches in break areas to help workers cool down during rest periods, utilizing mechanical equipment like conveyors and forklifts to reduce the manual labor and physical exertion, and using misting fans that provide a fine mist of water to cool the area. Now, sometimes adding air conditioning to your solar field or wind farm is not really feasible. So for those, we have administrative controls. These are controls that cause changes to tasks and schedules to reduce heat stress. One is training. Provide training on heat illness. Employee training should include, stop me if you hear anything familiar, types of heat-related illnesses, including how to recognize common and early signs and symptoms and when to contact emergency services, the importance of protecting new unacclimatized workers. This includes work practices to help workers develop acclimatization, understanding the occupational and personal risk factors for each employee. Employees should understand fluid replacement guidelines and the appropriate work rest cycles, and the importance of taking rest breaks in areas that are cooler than the work site. Supervisors should also be trained on implementing appropriate acclimatization schedules, on what procedures to follow when a worker has symptoms of heat-related illnesses, including emergency response procedures, how to identify heat hazards, how to respond to hot weather advisories, and how to monitor and encourage adequate fluid intake. Two, employers and supervisors should be able to identify heat hazards and the risks of heat illness due to high temperatures, humidity, sun, work demands, clothing, or PPE, and personal risk factors. You should identify if an employee has had a previous HRI, has low fitness, or other factors that might reduce the worker's ability to tolerate physical activity in hot environment. You can establish a monitoring system for signs and symptoms of heat illnesses. Also, training co-workers to monitor each other. Using the buddy system with trained workers for heat illness can help supervisors watch for signs of heat illnesses. A more robust heat illness prevention program can establish a medical monitoring program. This includes medical evaluation by a licensed practitioner before work starts and periodic medical evaluations as work continues. Three is limit exposures. This can be done by rotating job functions among workers to help minimize exertion and heat exposure, encouraging workers to wear light-colored, loose-fitting, and breathable clothing, requiring workers to stop working when they feel heat-related discomfort, assign new and unacclimatized workers a lighter work and longer, more frequent rest breaks. To limit exposure, you can modify the work rest schedules to allow more rest time. And employers should be aware that when you move around schedules, an early morning start time may increase fatigue. Monitor accordingly, as morning temperatures are also known to have higher humidity levels, which can lead to heat stress. OSHA and the CDC have a handy catchphrase for heat prevention, and that is water, rest, and shade. These are their most important steps. So for water, employers should provide cool drink water for workers to drink. For short jobs, cool potable water is sufficient. You should encourage workers to drink at least 1 cup or 8 ounces every 20 minutes while working in the heat. You should also tell your workers not to rely on feeling thirsty to prompt them to drink. They should be reminded to drink on a regular basis to maintain hydration throughout their shift and beyond without using the thirstiness as a cue. For longer jobs that are more than 2 hours, OSHA recommends that employers provide electrolyte-containing beverages such as sports drink. Now, there is some contention on whether electrolyte-containing beverages should be recommended, as a healthy adult should get their replacement needs from eating and drinking appropriately. Also, remind workers not to drink more than 6 cups or 48 ounces of water in an hour. Drinking too much water or other fluid can cause medical emergencies because of the concentration of salt in the bloodstream becoming too low. Rest. When heat stress is high, employers should require workers to take breaks. The length and frequency of rest breaks should increase as heat stress rises. In general, workers should be taking hourly breaks whenever heat stress exceeds the safe limit that we showed earlier. Breaks should last long enough for workers to recover from the heat. How long is long enough? That depends on several factors, including the environmental heat and the worker's physical activity level, as well as that individual worker's personal risk factor. The location of breaks also matters. If workers rest in a cooler location, they'll be ready to resume work more quickly. Breaks should last longer if there is no cool location for workers to rest at. Now, some workers might be tempted to skip breaks. In hot conditions, skipping breaks is not safe. Employers should make sure that workers rest during all recommended break periods. Shade. Workers should be given a cool location where they can take their breaks and recover from their heat. Outdoors, this might mean a shaded area, an air conditioned vehicle, a nearby building, a tent, or an area with fans and a misting device. Indoor workers should be allowed to rest in cool, air conditioned areas away from heat sources such as ovens or furnaces. And lastly, enhance heat tolerance. OSHA has found that almost half of heat related deaths occur on a worker's first day on the job. Over 70% of heat related deaths occur during the worker's first week. OSHA and NIOSH recommend the rule of 20% for building heat tolerance. That's 20% on the first day. New workers should only work 20% of the normal duration on their first day. 20% each additional day means increasing the work duration by 20% on subsequent days until the worker is performing on a normal schedule. For example, if a normal workday is 8 hours, the new worker should not spend more than 1 hour and 40 minutes, 20% of 8 hours, on their first day in the heat. They can spend the rest of the workday without heat stress. They should be given at least one rest break during that period when they're working. For workers who have had previous experience with the job, the acclimatization schedule should be no more than 50% on day one, 60 on day two, 80 on day three, and 100 on day four. By following this rule of 20%, new workers and returning workers should be working a full schedule by the end of their first week. The rule of 20% should protect most workers who are physically fit and have no other medical problems. Other workers may require more time to adapt to heat, up to 14 days in some cases. When in doubt, give workers more days to acclimatize. As duration of work increases, workers will need more rest breaks to recover from the heat load. To become acclimatized to the heat, you'll notice I was emphasizing duration. Workers should perform job tasks that are of a similar intensity to their expected work. Remember, to help workers build heat tolerance, reduce the duration of the work, not the intensity. In most cases, heat stress should be reduced by engineering or administrative controls. We've previously discussed how PPE can negatively affect heat regulation. However, in some limited situations, special cooling devices in the form of PPE can protect workers in hot environments. In ascending order from least to most intensive, there is reflective clothing. Worn loosely can reflect radiant heat away from the body and aid in keeping it cool. An infrared reflective face shield, cooling neck wraps that are designed to keep the overall body temperature low, insulated suits to protect against radiant heat and are often used in high temperature indoor environments such as foundries and steel mills, cooling vests that are designed to keep the body cool by using gel packs or phase change material. Though they can be heavy, these vests can contain as many as 72 reusable ice packs filled with water and dry ice. There are water garments that have circulated water through tubes sewn throughout the article of clothing, and air-cooled garments, which use forced air to cool the body by circulating air from a vortex tube connected to the internal compressed air source. That is all of the information I have for everyone on heat safety today.
From an owner's perspective, when thinking about contracting, what are some best practices that owners can use with their contractors to make sure that their contractors are taking this seriously and incorporating it into their construction practices?
I'll give Felipe a chance to answer this more in depth, but you should ensure that your contractors have a heat safety or climatization schedule in the contract to make sure that they are keeping their workers safe.
Yes, I think the key is to ensure that the safety plan put in place by contractors or owners applicable to the site are actually touch on this particular subject. Maybe some locations don't warrant it, but owners and contractors should be aware of the conditions that may be exposed here, and the safety plans should include requirements to comply with this type of training. It seems like training and awareness is the key to ensure the safety of the personnel.
Thank you, Felipe. Jamie asks in the chat, what are some interpersonal systems you can share with your on-site team to promote a safe work environment? It is my understanding that using the buddy system is pretty well used on site. That's the normal. But in training your workers in heat safety and encouraging them to keep an eye out with each other on how to recognize and understand symptoms of heat illnesses and when to what to do when someone is suffering. But yeah, utilizing the already in place buddy system with some helpful training on heat safety can take a lot of pressure off of supervisors and employers by having employees look out for each other. As I said in my presentation, one of the first things that you lose as you are suffering from heat related illnesses is your ability to think clearly and interpret the signals your body is sending you, your brain, and vice versa. So having another person looking out for you and looking out for someone else can put a real damper on the amount of tragedies that can occur.
Donna, when we were preparing for this seminar, you talked a little bit about social pressure and how that influences folks in the work environment. And can you talk a little bit about some of the things that you learned in your observations when you were putting this together that you shared with us earlier?
Yeah, while I was doing my research, OSHA noted that I think I said it earlier in the presentation. I think it was 50% of on job heat related death illnesses happen to someone on their first day at work, and then 70% happen to someone on their first week at work. OSHA really wants people to emphasize and understand that there could be a culture in the workplace of new employees wanting to prove themselves or work just as hard or just as long as returning employees, which can lead to them skipping breaks and not following proper acclimatization schedule, which is one of the causes of people seeking heat-related illnesses or people getting heat-related illnesses. So simply impressing upon new employees that their worth for you is not dependent on their actual performance their first day of work, or understanding that you will have to be kind of on the bench for the first 2 or 3 days of work until you are used to working in the heat in order to protect that new worker from hurting themselves, honestly. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming to Solis's Heat Illness Prevention webinar.